Okay. All right. So let's present here. All right. So you guys should have gotten the guided notes here. This is a two-parter. All right. So this is essentially section 2 of the chapter. So on Thursday, going to introduce a chapter talking about just basically the difference between history and prehistory, which much of this chapter is dealing with. All right. And we determined that the main difference is the evidence of written records, right? History, not solely, but primarily, we get a fuller story based on kind of like, or the supporting story based on written evidence, either written by those who were of the time or those who kind of like what we call primary sources or secondary sources, if you will. All right. And we kind of talked about how, in a sense, you have those people who are kind of dealing with those who study prehistory, fossils and artifacts to kind of tell the story. Archaeologists, anthropologists, a lot of times are fill in the blanks. Not always is this like kind of a true, like a 100% accurate, but there's solid theories and hypotheses, like the story of the Iceman, talking about kind of like how he was, what happened to him. You know, it was determined that he was probably murdered because he had a arrow in his back. But why is still debatable based on the fact that he didn't leave behind like a journal or anything of that nature. All right. And so what section 2 here is primarily dealing with in prehistory is we're kind of like trying to figure out the kind of origins of our species, right? And so what this kind of is basically kind of detailing here is the concept of human evolution, right? And so the study of human evolution is referred to as paleoanthropology. Whenever you see the term paleo, that just simply means old. All right. And so paleoanthropologists are the ones who are trying to find are basically kind of like what we call the missing link, right? This idea of like our connection from our kind of origins to our modern species. All right. Now, the concept of evolution itself, those of you guys who took biology class know that it was developed by a English botanist, figure guy by the name of Charles Darwin. Darwin wrote a book called The Origins of Species, which basically his studies on the Galapagos Islands off the coast of Ecuador in South America determined that every living species, you know, basically the ones that he was observing, that they change over time as a means to survival. All right. These changes are subtle. They occur over years and years, right? And with the whole idea of basically kind of maintaining the species, all right? And so he observed birds, tortoises, various kind of species there. And later people kind of basically transcended that to the concept of kind of human kind of development, if you will. All right, and that says the study of, human evolution is the theory that modern humans developed from early hominids. And again, we see the word theory. This isn't something that everybody subscribes to. And even those who believe in kind of the theory of human evolution, there's some debate within that where our kind of human origins, where that kind of like missing link is. All right, it's a theory. It's a pretty solid theory based on kind of scientific experiment and such. For example, gravity is simply a theory, but nobody's floating in the air, right? And so when you talk about kind of human evolution, and I'll give you the definition of what a hominid is here. You're usually thinking of like kind of a linear transition here, in which human beings essentially have kind of ape-like qualities, and over time kind of develop to where they kind of become modern and completely upright and walking. In reality, that kind of like visual is probably a little misleading. In reality, evolution really should be kind of like a tree in that sense, where you have certain branches that other branches come from, all right, that kind of basically develop from. Then you have some branches that die off. Like on Thursday, we'll talk particularly when talking about Neanderthals in that sense. All right. So that kind of like popular kind of lineage, kind of straight line is really a little misleading. All right. But the kind of definition for what a hominid is simply a creature that walks upright. All right. And a creature that walks upright has the kind of ability, what they call bipedalism, the ability to walk upright on two legs, thinking like pedaling a bike, if you will. All right. And like I said, some of you guys have probably had this in biology class. All right. Now, bipedalism alone doesn't necessarily classify someone as kind of human in nature. Like, for example, ostriches have the ability of bipedalism, and no one is going to be confusing an ostrich with a human, but it's a big part of the story. And it was something, again, like kind of paleoanthropology, as far as a science, is relatively young in scientific kind of terms. We're talking probably like 1800s, if you will. All right. It is not all, like, not everybody who is a kind of paleoanthropologist is necessarily on the same page, if you will. But there are certain things that they do tend to agree upon. All right. One is the kind of contemporary idea that bipedalism does make a big part of what is human-like, if you will. But the other one is basically kind of cranial size, brain structure, and things of that nature. All right. Am I moving too fast? You guys doing okay with this?
I'm doing good. I don't know about
you straight.
No. All right. Somebody yell, say, "I'm not good," and then I'll slow down. All right. But I'm just assuming y'all's is great. All right. So, one thing that generally we tend to kind of like the contemporary thought here is that most scientists who kind of study in human evolution believe that our human origins, if you go date back, originate in Africa. All right, some 3 to 4 million years ago, and even now, like this, like our chapter is actually somewhat outdated. The story gets pushed back a little bit further, even. All right, but it's from Africa, where we believe that our kind of human ancestors originated, and eventually at one point spread throughout the rest of the world. All right, so there's this concept, this out of Africa concept, which initially in the study of human, paleoanthropology, wasn't always the case. There were people that were primarily, and this was kind of a Eurocentric kind of discipline, that a lot of people were looking for the missing link being closer to Europe, because the majority of those who were kind of paleoanthropologists of kind of any famous would be in Europe. All right. So there's definitely a question on test where do most scientists believe all kind of early hominids originate, and that is in Africa. All right. The oldest kind of remains that we would kind of classify within that kind of classification of kind of our human ancestors are all in Africa, primarily in Eastern and Southern Africa. All right. Now, what you'll notice there on the notes here is like, what we're going to do is kind of trace our lineage from oldest to our modern human species. All right. And so I have like kind of Roman numeralized the classification of kind of human origins here. All right. Now, the first one, actually, our textbook is actually outdated with this, is essentially what they call Australopithecines. All right. Now, this was believed to be the oldest of the hominids up until recently. All right. And so lived anywhere between 3 to 4 million years ago. All right. Brain size about a third of the size of modern humans, based on cranial kind of skulls. Now, cranial shapes and that. So Australopithecines look very ape-like. All right. And so some people who are critical of the concept of human evolution, even those within kind of the story of human evolution, may somewhat kind of like, kind of debate the kind of, if this is our origin here. All right. But it's the issue of bipedalism that we're kind of looking at here. All right. And so Australopithecines, like I said, up until just recently was the oldest of the hominids. All right. I didn't have you guys write down Australopithecines. I'm not going to make you guys write down that word. It's a ridiculously long word. All right. If you decide to go into paleoanthropology, you'll be able to spell that kind of pretty easily. But until then, I'm not making you guys write that out. All right. So this is, and a lot of the kind of like discoveries that they find aren't complete skeletal designs, if you will. They will basically like the story of dinosaurs. A lot of times when you guys see in like museums, stuff like that, a lot of that stuff is basically kind of like molds that are kind of filled in, if you will. All right. But they definitely, Australopithecine definitely has a very primate look to it. All right. But like I said, the issue is really the concept of kind of bipedalism, looking at the pelvic bone and the femur. whether it's elongated into, and also like the pelvic bone is shaped a certain way, which would support bipedalism. All right. Like all these here, like, all major Australopithecine finds and discoveries have been found in Africa, mainly southern and eastern Africa, all right, stretching from Ethiopia, the Hadar region, all the way through to the Great Rift Valley, which is down by the region of Kenya and Tanzania, down into South Africa. All right, so all major Australopithecine discoveries have been found in these areas here. All right, like I said, just strictly basically Eastern and Southern Africa. And that's where that out of Africa theory kind of originates. However, like one of the earliest Australopithecine discoveries wasn't really fully accepted by the paleoanthropology community because it didn't meet the criteria that at the time paleoanthropologists were arguing that our missing link would be. All right. And that first major Australopithecine discovery is referred to as the Tong child, which was discovered in 1924 in South Africa. The guy who's credited with that discovery was a kind of paleoanthropologist, a professor from Australia named Raymond Dart. Story was Dart actually didn't discover it himself. He was getting ready for a wedding, and he was basically leading the dig in this area. Dart was one of the few guys that believed that the missing link would be in Africa. While he was getting ready, some workers from the dig brought to him a skull of a kind of, initially kind of looked very kind of like between the child and a kind of primate, and some bones, some teeth. The big thing was the leg bone, which looked, the femur bone looked more elongated than strictly kind of a primate that would be bent over, kind of walking on fours most of the time. All right. So Raymond Dart published his findings and wasn't accepted. All right. There were people that thought that he had essentially basically kind of like not necessarily ridiculed him, but they didn't take his findings very seriously. There was a discovery in the late 1800s in England called Piltdown Man, which kind of fit that already existing criteria on who would be the missing link. However, it was determined that Piltdown Man was a hoax. It was the jawbone of what was a chimpanzee and kind of like some bones from modern human species. All right. So once that was kind of determined as a hoax, Dart's theories were a little bit more fully accepted. All right. So there's Dart older, kind of holding the kind of the skull of the Tong child, which they believed was there was a kind of good sized hole in there that maybe a bird of prey had injured the kind of would be kind of a young kind of primate like, but not completely primate-like species. At this time, our human ancestors were not at the top of the food chain per se. All right, now comes fully kind of like Dart is fully kind of justified in his discoveries in 1974 with the discovery of what you guys did that worksheet on yesterday of what they refer to as Lucy, which was considered the oldest, most complete, and best preserved hominid for a long time. And just recently, it was replaced. But we consider the oldest, most complete, and best preserved Australopithecine. All right, this was almost a complete skeletal find there. All right, and like the article said, the guy who was kind of credited with the discovery there, the guy who was leading the expedition was a guy named Donald Johansen, who was a professor at Case Western University in Cleveland, Ohio. He was a graduate of the University of Illinois. Johansen and Tim White were kind of out looking around there. And this is in Ethiopia, in the Hadar region of Ethiopia. And like a lot of these discoveries, it was kind of like by happenstance, they found it. They referred to it as Lucy because they were listening to a lot of Beatles. And they named it after Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds. So once Lucy was discovered, that whole theory of out of Africa there and the emphasis on bipedalism really came to the forefront. So somebody like Dart, who for years, it wasn't really until like probably like the 50s that his theory was kind of like really kind of like fully accepted. And then in 74, he's basically kind of vindicated. All right. So this is the kind of in Chicago at the Field Museum, they have a replica of Lucy. The actual Lucy is in Ethiopia, but about 6-7 years ago, they had a tour at various museums. Chicago Field Museum was one of them that got to see the actual Lucy. But this is the kind of makeup there. All right, like you see some like rib bones, part of a jaw, the skull, but the big emphasis there was on the leg bone and pelvic bone, which indicated bipedalism. All right, it was different than a primate. So this is what kind of Lucy kind of looked like. All right. And so very still primate looking, spent time in trees as well. Now, the theory is that Lucy bipedalism became a evolutionary process in which living in tall grasslands in that region at that time, that standing upright would be a defense mechanism. All right. And so Lucy, not very tall, probably a 4 foot something. All right. However, and there's my man, Donald Johansson. That's a fresh look for paleoanthropologists. This is an older photo. I think he's a professor in Arizona State University. However, in 1994, all right, some like 3 years after Lucy was officially kind of like established as like the preeminent kind of hominid, there's a new classification. All right. And in 2010, when our textbook was printed, the kind of oldest, most complete early hominid was determined to be Artie, which pushes the story back another 1,000,000 years. All right, so our textbook, like I said, is already outdated. All right, and so this is a new classification called Ardipithecus, and so Artie, which in the kind of the local dialect in Ethiopia means ground floor there, indicated, like Lucy, Artie spent time in trees, but also on the ground. All right. Again, Tim White and another guy, Owen Lovejoy. And Tim White were on the expedition on Lucy. They were kind of influential in kind of this classification. All right. So really, like when they reprint this textbook for a new edition, they'll have to include this in here. All right, so Artie and the concept of Ardipithecus pushes it back 1,000,000 years, and this is the oldest, most complete early hominid. All right, and so this is the remains that they found of Artie. They found some teeth, skull, part of the skull. The other thing, the femur, as well as the pelvic bone. However, he looks very still like hands and feet, very primate-like. The people that they tend to focus on the idea of like the thumbs, right, particularly on the feet there, looks like, kind of like the big toe is more like a thumb. All right. Again, this is very primate-like, if you will. Not all paleoanthropologists come to accept this. There's still some debate on this, but the majority of those within paleoanthropology kind of argue that this is the kind of the very earliest evidence of our kind of like human ancestors, if you will. All right. Now, what we start to see here, we start to see other kind of discoveries that kind of fill in the gaps, if you will. There was the discovery actually in 1978, some 4 years after the discovery of Lucy, where we find footprints in the Great Rift Valley in Tanzania. The paleoanthropologist credited with this is Mary Leakey, and we'll talk about her a little bit again at the end here. The Leakey family are basically kind of the first family of paleoanthropology. All right, she discovered these footprints of what we kind of call a nuclear family. Basically, you would have, looks like an adult male, adult female, and a child. All right, now these, using potassium argon dating, they determined, and this was a region that was incredibly isolated and very dry, that the footprints were made probably about 3.7 million years ago. All right, and that coincides with Australopithecine. All right, so this again kind of vindicates not just Johansson, but also Raymond Dart. All right, in that sense. So these, I'll show you the kind of, this is Leakey kind of measuring the footprints. This is the kind of the setup here where you see like the adult male right there, what they believe an adult female footprint, and then like any kid kind of running off from his parents or her parents. All right. The footprints looked unique in that sense. They don't look like a modern foot. They don't look like a primate's impression there. So there's this kind of like in between kind of status, if you will. All right. And so this kind of, not just, these aren't fossil remains. These are basically kind of foot imprints. All right. So that kind of fills in the gaps in the story. All right. Now, kind of what there's some people believe Australopithecine either kind of like evolved or into what we would classify our kind of second step on the evolutionary tree here, where we get to the first classification of man or Homo, which is Homo habilis. Now, the name itself means skillful man, and we'll kind of explain why it means skillful man. Like Australopithecines and Ardipithecus, were only found in Africa, primarily probably in East Africa between 2.5 and 2 million years ago. The theory is it's a 50% larger brain than Australopithecines based on kind of the cranium, the skull size. And it's how they use their brain and how they kind of use their kind of surroundings to their advantage, if you will. All right. So, and for a long time before, essentially before kind of the discovery of Lucy, this was kind of they consider the missing link for a brief moment there. All right. I'm gonna move on there. This is the kind of one of the skulls of Homo habilis. You still see like a heavy brow, which is very kind of primate-like. So artist rendering, we see this kind of still primate kind of image here, if you will. However, what's important is not necessarily the kind of how Homo habilis looks, but what Homo habilis is holding in his hand there. All right. It's believed that Homo habilis used their kind of slightly larger brain to make stone tools, all right, ushering in what we call Stone Age, right? And the first phase of Stone Age referred to as the Paleolithic. Again, you see the word paleo in there. Again, that means old. So we have Old Stone Age right there. All right. And so the deal is that they would use these, which are basically kind of flint stones, right? Not necessarily to make things like how we use tools today, but primarily for survival. It's believed that they would kind of like use kind of like flake off, kind of create a point on the stone to essentially basically extract bone marrow from animal bones. All right. In a sense here, Homo habilis wasn't necessarily like the preeminent hunter, but was more of a scavenger. And that's the theory that we get. All right. So the use of the stone tools were very primitive, but the idea is that with a larger brain that they were able to essentially kind of observe rocks, essentially to be able to kind of flake those rocks where they could extract bone marrow. All right. So these are some of the first kind of what they consider stone tools. And again, like if you and I kind of stumbled across these, we would probably just like kind of pass them over. But paleoanthropologists kind of have a little different kind of view on this. And you see the kind of almost like kind of points that are kind of arrived there. There's obviously they have been what we call flaked or flinted, if you will. All right. And so the first major kind of Homo habilis discovery was found in 1960. Again, you see Mary Leakey there. Her and her husband, Louis Leakey, were credited with what they call East Africa man. This is also in Tanzania, not too far from where Mary Leakey found those footprints about 28 years later, almost 30 years later. All right. The Leakey family, they have sons and daughter that are also in paleoanthropology. Right. And so they uncovered these remains, but they also uncovered what they found was the evidence of stone tools there. All right. And so for a bit there, this was essentially the missing link up until probably the story of Lucy there. All right. So I'm going to show you here. Well, I'll leave it this. We're gonna on Thursday. I'm gonna start with this slide, but I'm not gonna have you guys write it down because usually when I'm in the middle of a kind of presentation, when we got a part two, I'll start with the one that we had kind of ended with. All right. So, do you guys have any questions or any concerns here?
No.
No, you guys good? All right. Let me go. All right. So I'm gonna send out another worksheet tomorrow. It'll be on the Leakeys, the discovery of kind of East Africa man and such. All right, and then on Thursday, I'm going to finish up this talking about the classifications that lead to kind of modern human species. Okay. All right, guys, it's 10:15. I'll let you guys go. All right. If you have any questions or something, email me. I will see you guys on Thursday. Sound good?
All right.
All right. See you guys.